It's no secret that Spain is a very popular destination for Northern Europeans and in fact for people from all over the world in search of the sun, the Mediterranean Sea, Spanish cuisine, open spaces and the friendly, welcoming nature of the Spanish. People visit the country, decide to work and live in the country or to retire here, and sometimes they holiday in Spain on numerous occasions each year so that buying a home becomes the most sensible option to pursue. I'm Jonathan Eshkeri, an English solicitor and Spanish abogado. Since 2004, I've been advising and assisting people who want to buy Spanish property. I have offices in London and in Tarragona, from where I'm speaking now, just south of Barcelona. In this video, I'll be talking you through the property purchase process, highlighting the potential pitfalls and guiding you as to how to avoid them in the most effective way. It's important to distinguish between buying property that's ready to live in, whether that be resale property or property that's being sold for the first time by the developer, and buying property off-plan. In this video, I'll be focusing on property that's ready to live in as soon as the ink is dry on the sale and purchase documentation. In my experience, there are three broad types of property that Brits and other Northern Europeans are most interested in purchasing in Spain. There's the single family home, usually with a garden of its own and often with a swimming pool, an apartment or a house, either in a block or on a development that often shares a garden and a pool with other properties. And there's the house in a rural setting, which may be anything from a converted barn to a large farmhouse, often purchased with 1 or more hectares of land. The first step of your property search will involve you contacting local estate agents, as they're the people whose job it is to market properties for sale. That may seem obvious, but I think that it's important to emphasise the role of the estate agent. Once you've chosen the property that you'd like to purchase, and perhaps once you've negotiated a price at which you'd like to purchase it, but before making any deposit payment at all, the next step is to seek independent expert legal advice of a lawyer qualified in Spain and with clear experience of Spanish property related work. The lawyer you instruct ought to be entirely independent of the seller or the estate agent, so someone you have identified yourself. If you were buying a property in England or Wales or in numerous other countries around the world, you'd be very surprised if the estate agent asked you, as the buyer, for any money at all. You certainly wouldn't pay money to the estate agent to secure the property. The matter will be put into the hands of a solicitor who'd make inquiries, report to you, and only once you are happy to proceed with the purchase would the solicitor make a deposit payment on your behalf. The process should be the same in Spain, although estate agents will try to convince you to the contrary. They'll often tell you that you don't need to take independent advice when purchasing a property in a country, the language and culture of which are not entirely familiar to you. They'll tell you that you ought to trust the estate agent and the seller and rely on the notary to ensure that everything proceeds according to law. If you're a Spanish national, then it's true. You'd be unlikely to engage a lawyer to advise you in relation to a property purchase. That's because Spanish lawyers are trained as litigators, not as solicitors handling the purchase and sale of property. Spanish nationals take advice from their accountant and from their specialist tax advisor. They speak directly with the town hall and with the community of property owners, as well as with any other government department where inquiries need to be made. They can ask searching questions of the notary before whom the completion documentation will be signed. As you can imagine, Spanish nationals are more au fait with Spanish business culture than a foreign national would be. If you're not Spanish, even if you've purchased property in Spain once or twice before, you'll not have the knowledge or the experience to be able to foresee the possible problems, and so you'll not have the opportunity to avoid them. Having said that, there are many people who, knowing everything I've just said, will make a deposit payment to an estate agent before they've received the advice of an independent specialist lawyer. That's not the end of the world, but it may make inquiries more complex as those involved in selling the property feel that they have already clinched a sale. If you've paid a deposit and you don't complete the purchase, then unless there's something fundamentally wrong with the property, you're almost bound to lose your deposit. You might want to pull out of the purchase if your advisor identifies a niggling issue that puts you off the property, but you'll think a number of times before you lose 3, 4 or 5,000 euros. So once you've found the property that you want to purchase and have agreed a price, there'll be various issues for your independent lawyer to check. These points will vary according to the type of property that you're looking at. First of all, let's have a look at a property in a residential development. And here we are, on the terrace of a 2-bedroom apartment on a golf course in the northeast of Spain, in the autonomous community of Catalonia. This development was built during the 1990s in a number of phases. There are all sorts of different types of property here, from apartments like this one, to terraced houses like these, and single-family homes like this one. In relation to any given development in Spain, you'll find a community of property owners, which is akin to a residents association, although it's established by law when the various units in the development are assigned individual title numbers at the property registry. Each owner is a member of the community of property owners. One owner will be voted president, another secretary, and another treasurer. There may also be further members of the executive committee of the community who will be elected by the property owners according to the needs of each community. Every year, there's at least one general meeting of the community, the AGM, and there may be extraordinary general meetings, if necessary, during the year. At these meetings, all the important issues regarding the community are discussed, of which the most important from the perspective of a prospective purchaser are the indebtedness of the community members in terms of service charge, the total estimated service charge for the coming year, and the likely future expenditure in relation to major works. These issues are important because prior to deciding whether to purchase the property, you should check how much service charge you'll be paying, whether a relatively high number of owners are failing to pay their service charge, and whether the community is about to install a new pool or undertake other major works that will cost you a lot of money. Your independent advisor must investigate these points, and he or she can do so by requesting the minutes of the last 2 AGMs of the community. On this development, there's more than one community. There's an overarching community that's responsible for the entire development, and there are sub-communities, each of which is responsible for different groups of properties, making the entire development far easier to manage. One of the questions I'm often asked is whether a survey is necessary. It stands to reason that if you're buying bricks and mortar, you should have the structure checked out by someone who knows what he or she is looking at. In the UK, you'd engage a surveyor to carry out a survey and produce a report. In Spain, it's possible to engage UK qualified surveyors or Spanish qualified architects and others qualified in Spain in the field of construction to prepare a report on a property, highlighting any possible structural defects and other issues relating to the physical state and location of the property. It must be said that Spanish nationals would be very unlikely to engage a surveyor or similarly qualified professional unless there were obvious signs of structural problems. It's important to bear in mind that any survey will be couched in language limiting the surveyor's liability. I'm reluctant to say that a survey may not be necessary in certain circumstances, but the cost is not great, between €600 and €1,000, and a survey report can provide a great deal of peace of mind, so the decision must be yours. Another vital issue to be considered by your independent lawyer is the question of who owns the property and what debts and other encumbrances are registered against the property. An encumbrance could be a right of way, for example. There may be a restriction registered by someone who's litigating with the registered owner, so that an interest in the property is subject to the outcome of legal proceedings. Of course, there may be a loan secured against the property by a mortgage or other charge. If so, you'll want to be certain that either before completion or simultaneously with completion of the purchase, the loan will be repaid and the mortgage redeemed. It may seem that you own a gated garden adjacent to the property, but the property register may reveal that you don't own it, but have only exclusive access to it. You'll want to know about that. The most important issue to determine is whether the property is registered in the name of the person who's purporting to sell it. Very seldom do we find people trying to sell a property to which they have no right at all, but it's far more common to encounter situations in which the seller has not yet registered the property in his or her name. A typical scenario is property registered in the name of a deceased person. In Spain, the administration of a death estate can be more long-winded than in the UK. Before you can buy the property, the interest in the property that belongs to the deceased person must usually be registered in the name of the beneficiary or beneficiaries of the estate. Another possibility is that the seller purchased the property by way of a private contract but didn't ever sign a public sale and purchase document, which is vital in Spain in order to be able to register the property in the name of the purchaser. All these factors are reasons why it's not sensible to part with any money at all until your independent legal advisor has made full inquiries and can report to you, so that whatever you decide to do, you're aware of the risks associated with that step. With this type of property, the question of planning permission is not usually problematic. It would be very difficult to complete an entire development without having planning permission from the local authority. However, those considering the purchase of a single family home that sits on its own plot and does not form part of a development should take great care to ensure that full planning permission was obtained prior to building the property, that the property was built in accordance with that planning permission, and that the local authority has signed off on the build since it was completed. Whoever owns a house built on an independent plot is responsible only for what sits on the plot. So there's no need to check whether anyone else owes money to a community, and there'll probably be no question of service charges. You may want to check what the annual rates bill is likely to be, but in all other respects, the checks to be made and the questions to ask are very similar to those relating to a property on a development like this one. An entirely different proposition is the house in a rural setting. We need to be realistic about rural Spanish property. In the UK, we're very used to finding houses in the countryside on their own piece of land, half a mile or more from the nearest neighbouring property. They may be refurbished farmhouses or barns and often have very high values. It's relatively common for people in the UK to live in such properties, and they've done so for generations, usually without infringing any rules at all. In Spain, people do not tend to live in the countryside. They live in villages, towns and cities, and the countryside is reserved for agriculture. On a plot of agricultural land, you'll find agricultural buildings made of stone that have been there for generations. These were used, and sometimes still are, to store harvested crops until they can be taken to market, to house livestock in the bad weather, and to store tools for working the land. Spanish people don't tend to live in these properties. They may have such a property that they use on a Sunday morning during the warm months to spend the day with family over a long lunch. There may be a lavatory connected to a cesspit in the building, but not a fully fitted bathroom, and certainly not a fully fitted kitchen. Spanish people wouldn't live in an agricultural building, or almacén agrícola in Spanish. That said, people arrive from northern European countries, often from the UK, and want to develop their countryside property. Perhaps they find a countryside property that someone else has already developed. The price is often extremely attractive and seems too good to be true. It's highly unlikely that permission was sought for any property of this type, let alone granted. Almost always, there are two major considerations with a rural Spanish property. The first is whether the land has protected status, as it may be within a natural park, for example. So perhaps it's unlawful to live there at all. The second is whether enough time has passed since the property was built for the current owner and the person responsible for building the structure to be immune from any civil action that may be brought for the illegal build, action that can culminate in the demolition of the property. In different parts of Spain, that time period varies. It can be 6 years or 15 years, or only 4 years in some places. It's essential to bear in mind that even if the existing structure will not be problematic, it'll often be impossible to obtain any further planning permission to make any other changes to the property, including constructing any outbuildings or a swimming pool, for example. If there's already a pool at the property, then the same considerations apply as to a house. This all goes to what I said at the beginning of this video. Don't pay any money to anyone at all until your independent legal advisor has made inquiries and reported to you. Once all inquiries have been made and you've decided to proceed with the purchase, it's usual for you to enter into a private agreement with the seller. The agreement ought to be drafted either by your independent lawyer or by the seller, the seller's agent or the seller's lawyer, but in any event reviewed by your lawyer who will make any necessary amendments. A deposit is paid when the agreement is signed and a final date for completion is established. Your independent lawyer can make the deposit payment on your behalf, and he or she will make it either directly to the seller or to the seller's lawyer or to an estate agent who's able to prove that he has the seller's authority to market the property for sale. It's then for your legal advisor to prepare for completion. The completion documentation will be signed in a room just like this one, as this is in fact a meeting room in the offices of a notary in the city of Tarragona. The people in the room will be the buyer or someone representing the buyer, and the seller or someone representing the seller, the notary, and most probably one or more estate agents who will be keen to get paid for their work. Even if the buyer and seller are represented by advisors or estate agents at the meeting, they may come along as well, so you can easily have 7 or 8 people around the table. The documentation is checked and signed, payment is made to the seller by way of banker's draft, and the keys are handed to the purchaser or the purchaser's representative. Very often, the purchase monies are divided into an amount to be paid directly to the estate agent, being the estate agent's fee, and an amount being the balance to be paid to the seller, so 2 banker's drafts. In that way, everyone leaves the completion meeting having achieved their respective goals. The seller has sold, the purchaser has purchased and has the keys, and the estate agent has received the agreed fee. All that's left to do is for your independent lawyer to pay purchase tax on your behalf and register the property in your name. If you have any queries that haven't been covered in this video, or if you need any advice at all regarding Spanish matters, please contact me directly. My contact details are to be found on our website. That's www.solicitorsInspain.com. Thanks for watching.